All right, everyone. Today we are continuing Unit 2, Colonial America. In this lesson, we are going to focus on why the English colonies developed along the east coast of North America and what life was like during the colonial era. When we hear the phrase Colonial America, we are talking about a period in history when European powers, especially England, established permanent colonies in North America. These colonies would eventually grow into the 13 colonies that later became the United States. But before we get into the colonies themselves, let's first talk about geography. Because geography heavily influenced where people settled, how colonies developed, and even how people made money. Take a look at a map of eastern North America. Two major geographic features stand out immediately: the Atlantic Ocean and the Appalachian Mountains. The Atlantic Ocean connected the colonies directly to Europe. This allowed trade, immigration, communication, and supplies to move between England and the colonies. Coastal cities became extremely important because ships carried goods back and forth across the ocean. The Appalachian Mountains, however, created a natural barrier. During the early colonial period, these mountains limited westward settlement because they were difficult to cross. As a result, most colonies developed close to the Atlantic coast. Now, when historians talk about colonial America, they are usually referring to the era when England established 13 colonies along the eastern coast of North America. This period was characterized by several major developments. First, the colonies became part of England's economic system known as mercantilism. England expected the colonies to provide raw materials and buy English goods. Second, representative governments began to form. Colonists slowly developed systems where people could elect representatives to help make laws. Third, many different groups migrated to the colonies for political, economic, religious, and social reasons. And finally, the colonies became places of major religious change and diversity. Now let's break down the different reasons people came to colonial America. First, we have political reasons. European nations constantly competed with one another for land, trade, and power. Colonization became part of that competition. If England established more colonies, England became stronger. If France or Spain gained more territory, they became more powerful. Monarchs often provided funding for colonies because colonies could increase national wealth and influence. Some colonies were even started through charters granted to companies. These companies would invest money into colonies, hoping to eventually make profits. Competition between countries sometimes led to colonies changing hands. For example, Delaware and New Jersey were once contested between the Dutch and the Swedish. New York originally belonged to the Dutch before the English eventually took control of it. This shows us that colonial America was not peaceful or simple. European powers constantly competed for territory and influence. Next, we have economic reasons. Many people came to the colonies hoping to improve their economic situation. England followed the policy of mercantilism, which meant the colonies existed partly to benefit England economically. The colonies supplied raw materials such as timber, fur, crops, and minerals. In return, England sold finished products back to the colonies. Colonists also saw economic opportunity in land ownership. In Europe, land was often controlled by wealthy nobles and passed down through generations. In the colonies, however, land was more available. That meant ordinary people had opportunities they may never have had in Europe. People came seeking farmland, trade opportunities, natural resources, and wealth. Now let's talk about religious reasons, because religion played a huge role in the settlement of colonial America. To understand this, we first need to go back to England during the 1500s. Originally, England was Catholic and recognized the authority of the Pope in Rome. But everything changed under King Henry VIII. Henry VIII wanted to end his marriage to his wife, Catherine of Aragon, because she had not produced a male heir that survived into adulthood. He asked the Pope for an annulment, which would basically cancel the marriage in the eyes of the Church. The Pope refused. Henry VIII became furious and decided to break away from the Catholic Church entirely. In the 1530s, Henry created the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church. This event became part of the English Reformation. What made this so important was that the monarch, meaning the King or Queen of England, became the head of the Church of England instead of the Pope. That meant religion and government became deeply connected. If the monarch was Protestant, the country was expected to be Protestant. If the monarch was Catholic, pressure often shifted back toward Catholicism. After Henry VIII died, his children continued this religious struggle. One of his daughters, Mary I, became queen and attempted to restore Catholicism in England. She aggressively persecuted Protestants and had many executed, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. When Mary died, her half-sister Elizabeth I became queen. Queen Elizabeth I restored Protestantism and strengthened the Anglican Church. Under Elizabeth, the Church of England became more firmly established, and once again, the monarch controlled the church. This created major tension in England because not everyone agreed with the official religion. Some people believed the Anglican Church was still too similar to Catholicism. Others wanted complete religious freedom. Some groups faced persecution, fines, or punishment for practicing different beliefs. As a result, many people began leaving England and coming to the Americas seeking religious freedom and the chance to practice religion their own way. Other colonies became known for religious tolerance, where multiple religious groups were allowed to live and worship peacefully. Religion shaped many parts of colonial life, including laws, education, community rules, and daily behavior. Finally, we have social reasons. For many people, the colonies represented opportunity and a fresh start. Some came seeking adventure and personal prestige. Young men especially hoped to gain wealth, status, or land through colonial life. Owning land became one of the biggest opportunities for social mobility. In Europe, your social class was often determined at birth and very difficult to change. In the colonies, however, hard work and land ownership sometimes allowed people to improve their social standing. One interesting example is Georgia. Georgia was originally established partly as a safe place for debtors and certain criminals. English leaders hoped people could rebuild their lives and contribute positively to society in the colony. As we study colonial America, it is important to remember that the colonies were shaped by many different motivations. Some people came seeking wealth, others wanted religious freedom, some were looking for power or adventure, others simply wanted a second chance. The colonies also became places where cultures mixed, economies grew, governments developed, and tensions slowly began building between the colonies and England. Those tensions would eventually lead to something massive, the American Revolution. But before we get there, we first need to understand how these colonies were built, why people came, and how colonial society developed. That foundation begins here in colonial America.